know about you, but sometimes I find that talking about Christianity can be an overwhelming minefield to step into. And I don't think I'm the only one. It's just so tangled up with all our ideas, opinions, and emotions, you know? Plus, you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to offend anyone. You don't want to sound stupid or be accused of not being faithful enough for not knowing something. And I think that's why so many people say they never talk about religion in mixed company. Luckily, Tammy and Laura don't have a problem talking about any of it. They understand that theology is an ongoing conversation between people of faith who are just trying to get closer to the truth about who and what God is. And it's in the conversation that things become untangled. Welcome to Untangling Faith. We're pretty excited that you're here.
So our topic today is pretty cool, in my opinion, because it's a topic that comes up almost every day in my ministry, because I minister to so many people who fit in this group that we're about to talk about. And it came up, the subject has come up, we've bumped up against it a lot in past episodes, especially the most recent past, the last two episodes, we talked about issues of the LGBTQ community and how it has affected, how the church addresses it versus how it actually affects the individual that gets hit with all of that stuff.
And those last couple episodes, we talked specifically about deconstructing, and our friends shared their story of that. And for each of them, LGBTQ issues played a role in their need to deconstruct and their decision to do so, the way the church has handled or mishandled this issue.
Right. So we're talking about Christianity versus gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and transgender or transsexual gets lumped into the LGB group. And from what I understand, I mean, they're really just two very different issues altogether, two very different topics altogether. And, but because the rest of the world doesn't understand any of it, we just lump them all into one big group and say, all right, you're all one big group. The reality is they all get ostracized in the same way, and they get excluded for the same reasons and all of those kinds of things. And it's the same bigotry. And I do believe that that's really all it is bigotry.
That was what I was thinking, was that anything that is not gender normative, that is not our traditional views, we've lumped out all of the rest of it together. So anything that is not straight female, straight male gets in this LGBTQ IA plus category.
Right.
Yeah, even though it's a really complex issue, and there are a lot of varieties of issues, subtext within there.
Yeah. So we have, as far as I'm concerned, talking about these topics, or this, multiple topics within one topic, for this episode, we're talking about what does the Bible say about it, whether or not it's a faith issue or not. I just recently posted a video by, it looked like an Anglican priest, I believe, or an Episcopal priest, maybe a Catholic priest, I'm not sure who's wearing the collar. And he did this little thing talking about transgenderism and that it's not a biblical issue. And he kind of goes into why that is. And I shared that on my thing. It isn't a biblical issue. I don't think transgender is an issue that the church needs to be getting involved in at all, because it doesn't come up in the Bible at all. Being transgender is none of our business. Really, homosexuality, I don't think is any of our business either. But because of the way that scriptures have been translated in certain ways and the way that we are interpreting them in modern day context as opposed to biblical context, we think the Bible talks about homosexuality. And so therefore that has moved into the debate within the church. I don't think transgender, I think transgender is a medical issue.
Why don't you define transgender for the people listening?
That's a good idea. And actually, again, I've been corrected recently. There's conversation within the transgender community. Transgender is the umbrella, I believe, term for anybody who falls under the it falls into the gender dysphoria role, which is your brain doesn't match with your body. The gender that your brain feels and your body are different, but that also splashes out in different ways. You've got transvestites, which are just men, usually gay men, who like dressing up like women, and it's a performance issue. In fact, as far as I can tell, that seems to be kind of a performance world. There's a lot of drama, a lot of singing, stage work, all that kind of stuff. They're personas and characters and things like that. Now, I would be thrilled if somebody from the transvestite community wanted to, jump in there. But these are men who dress in drag and things like that. Mm-hmm. I'd love for you to correct me on that, because I don't know any transvestites, so I haven't been able to get as much information about that. Transsexual is someone who does not connect with their genitalia. Their brain registers one gender, while their genitalia registers, and possibly sometimes their DNA and all of that register as another gender. But there are so many complications in there, and I am not a medical expert, and so you can't quote me on the medical aspects of this. But I've had enough people send me enough journals and medical journals and things like that, and medical explanations, that I truly understand that transsexual issues is the same thing as, it's in the same family as people who are what's the word, intersexed. Okay. Which back in my childhood days, that was called hermaphrodite.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. And so that's someone who's born with both gender, mm-hmm. genitalia, whatever.
I have had people in the medical world, more than one, tell me that in working in hospitals, particularly hospitals that deliver babies, it's not common. It would actually be rare, but that they will have children who are born with mm-hmm. genitalia, some of each or all of each, and that a decision would be made. And used to, the decision was made like a generation or so ago. They would ask the parents, you want us to push this in the direction of boy or girl? Now we have the ability to do DNA testing and choose a gender that might align with the DNA. So trans, whatever that is referred to, I've heard it referred to as transgender. It is a literal physical medical condition.
Yeah.
And that is not, to me, it may have spiritual implications for the person who is experiencing it and their family, but it is not primarily a religious issue.
Right. Right. It's not a moral issue.
The religious question is, how do we do ministry to
right.
people who are experiencing that and their families?
Yeah, especially because it's, and by the way, it's 1% or less of the population. So the fact that we're even talking about transgender at all, much less as often as we're talking about it, just seems a little histrionic to me. It seems a little unnecessary. I don't know, melodramatic.
So one of the questions that gets asked when we say that it's less than 1% of the population, is that may be true for the medical condition. Are there not people who are choosing it, who are saying they're transgender, for whom there isn't a medical issue? And those are the people we're worried about. My response is always that when we're looking for something to be afraid of, we are naturally afraid of something that is different or unknown, or that we don't fully understand. And that if we're talking about pretending to be male, pretending to be safe, pretending to be kind, there is always the ability for human beings to pretend to be something that they're not. I just don't know that this is the thing we should be the most afraid of.
I want to say in response to that, who cares? They talk about, well, we're protecting the children. I saw somebody that I'm friends on Facebook with, who I've never met. We just had a common mutual friend that we were communicating with and whatever. We're probably not friends anymore after what I posted on their page the other day. But she posted something about, saving our children from this transgender thing, that parents are pushing children to be something that they're not. And so I replied, I was like, I just don't think that there are that many, if any, parents pushing their children to be a gender that they weren't born with. I think that these are parents listening to their children and trying to honor who their children say they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that if a parent wants to allow a child to explore who they are, however they want to, I think that the less interference the child gets from the parent, or the less resistance they get from the parent. If it is just a phase, they'll just move through it. You resist it and you're going to cause them to dig in. If you don't resist it and you just let it go, and it continues and perpetuates, and they stay in that identity that they started when they were really, it's legit. Let the child tell you who they are. And then of course they go ahead.
We also hear people then come back and say, but we're allowing a young person whose brain is not fully developed, whose life is not fully set. Like, I wanted to be many, many things growing up. Wanted to be president. Now you can keep that. I wanted to be a model, not cut out for that. I went through a lot of things of what I thought before I landed on what I was actually created and called to do. And they're saying we're allowing children to go through surgeries to change their gender, at least their physical appearance of gender, before they are old enough to really understand that. And when I did the research a few years ago, when we, particularly here in our state, we denied medical treatment to suppress secondary sexual characteristics in people who believe they were transgender. Because if you're going to transition, suppressing those secondary sexual characteristics makes the transition easier. And when those medications are removed, you simply will then begin to have the secondary sexual characteristics. So it left open a possibility. What I discovered was we didn't have, this was not happening on every corner. Every local clinic is not doing this, and the surgeries were not happening. And what I found was they're not happening on minors.
Right.
That the process is a multi-year process, around 7 years, from first exploring it through the psychological and psychiatric screenings, through the medical screenings, to even then living in the other gender for a long time before the surgery was possible. So it felt like to me, the way the medical community was handling it, if it was a phase or a reaction to trauma or all the other things that people list that might trigger it when it's not real, those things are addressed before a surgery took place.
It's a lot easier to know what's going on if you are allowing the child to openly express, feel, process however they feel naturally inclined to do so. And by giving them those hormone suppressing drugs early on to keep them from starting puberty, just buys them more time to figure it out.
Yeah. Yes.
Because what happens, from what I understand, is that once the hormones start kicking in and the body starts changing accordingly to the programming, that's when the real dysphoria kicks in. That's when the real depression and anxiety and psychological problems come into play. That's when they start dealing with the problems of not fitting in, all of that stuff, the spiritual issues. That's when that starts to come in, because this isn't I'm looking in the mirror now and I'm not seeing what I'm supposed to see. And we're fascinated by that kind of thing anyway. Throughout, as far as in my childhood, the 80s and the 90s, boy, we loved those movies where you wake up in the wrong body, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Freaky Friday.
Yeah, exactly. Or I don't know, there was one with Rob Schneider, I think, who woke up as a dog, or,
oh, yeah. Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But then there was another one where I think a man woke up as a woman. And write in the comments what movie that was, because I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was a Mel Gibson movie. he woke up and he was her and she was him, and they had to go through a day or a week in each other's bodies and experience. Yeah.
And we're fascinated with that movie because we think, oh my gosh, what would that be like? Well, there are people who live that every day. They wake up every morning in the wrong body. And it's not some science fiction thing. It is a thing that just, it doesn't fit. But if we can give the child those hormone suppressing drugs early, before they start going through that, they never have to deal with that portion of the dysphoria, and they have time to figure out. But then say they keep going and they're 16 and they go, you know what, Mom, I really think I am this. I'm starting to feel who I'm supposed to be. And so you stop the medication and puberty starts from where it left off. So you'll be a little behind the 8 ball early in your 20s, but after that you catch up and you're fine. There's no permanent damage there. So I don't understand where the abuse comes in. You're letting the child decide, and like, but they're children, they don't know. Well, I beg to differ. I've played with enough children and watched them in their playtime early on, and known them throughout their lives. And I was able to see from the beginning who these kids might become,
But the children are still not making the decision alone.
No.
That is where parents are involved to nurture them, to listen, to pay attention. And then the medical community becomes involved, and you now have a doctor. And so I believe a lot of this goes back to this anti-education, this anti-intellectual push that we have going on. We don't trust the medical field. And we want to act like every doctor on every corner is a quack and a kook who will do anything you ask them to do. And I think that is not the case. Medical professionals I know and that I engage with are thoughtful, scientific, and thorough in the way they are handling this. And it particularly seems like they want to make sure they're handling it well so that it's not taken out of their hands. But it's very common for us not to understand, for the general public to not understand all of what the medical field knows and understands. And there are things today that seemed like magic and superstition a couple of generations ago that we now know have a basis in science. And I think there will come a day when we are going to realize that we continued to do injury to people because we were so afraid that the treatment was injuring them, that we are going to have denied people treatment and care they did need. And I am a personal responsibility advocate, and I am a parent's rights advocate. And so for me, this is an issue that belongs between a minor child, their parent, and their doctor, or between an adult and their medical team. And what not me.
Into is, again, this is a similar conversation that we had during the abortion episode, where we're talking about whether or not the church has the right to come into our households and dictate how we raise our children, and also whether or not the government, but see, here's the government being influenced by the church, or the church being influenced by the government, and who knows where one starts and the other one leaves off at this point anymore. But it's a lack of trust that parents and doctors are going to make good decisions for you and for your family. And so the politician or the pastor is going to come in and tell you, because either you're not smart enough or moral enough, again, to be able to make decisions for your family, your child, and your family's needs. And really, again, it's none of our business. That's the part that what becomes my business is when I have someone who walks through my doors dealing with deconstruction and all of this kind of stuff. I had a friend of mine who is transgender call me after they watched our episode on gender, on the last episode with Renee and Randa. And they said, boy, did I relate to a lot of that, just really. And what they connected to was the deconstruction and the process that they went through coming back to the church, or coming back to, they said they never left God. They left religion. Thank goodness, which is probably why they're doing as well as they are. They always believe God loved them, thank God. But they didn't trust religion anymore. The institution of religion obviously was broken, and so they walked away. And thankfully have found they found a church that they can go to now. So anyway, it was just so where it becomes my business is when they walk through my doors or they walk into my life, and I then am sharing a God with them that they've never met, because that God has been withheld from them because of who they are and because of how they were born. It reminds me a little bit of, you growing up and thinking you wanted to be a minister, and your church just simply would not allow you to entertain that at all. And you had to delay that part of who you were, who you were created to be, who you were called to be, until you got
and
away.
spent a lot of years trying to convince myself that I was not feeling the call I was feeling, to convince myself that what I was feeling was wrong.
And that you're not a sinner for feeling it. You're not going against nature or God, because that's who you've been called to be. That's where it becomes my business. If they bring it they come into my world, they come into my thing. And then I find myself in a position of having to wait a minute. Wait, who told you that you're not, that God doesn't love you, that you're not good enough, that what? And then having to kind of earn their trust back, essentially. And I do with all LGBTQ people. I find myself having to earn the trust on behalf of the entire church universal. I'll teach them once again that they can in fact trust me, that I'm not going to turn on them. I'm not going to hurt them, at least not intentionally, and definitely not because they are who they are. I mean, I'm human. I fail all the time, right? Stick my foot in all the time, but I am not going to target them or turn on them at all ever because of who they are. And so, but sometimes it can take years to earn that trust again.
Yeah.
Because it's been so deeply broken by Christians.
And so my feeling is like the message we can send as the church is that God loves you, and that God loves you exactly as you are right now. And so do we. Now, I'm also a person who believes the Holy Spirit is going to work on things. That's always the first pushback I get, is like, you say you love people the way they are, but aren't we supposed to be on a journey? And with us in the Methodist Church, we talk about a journey of sanctification, becoming more Christ-like. Yes, but it doesn't mean that you're not deeply loved in the state you are today while you go on that journey. We're going to have some disagreements about what the things may be that the Holy Spirit is going to want to work on for you. And for me, that core and central part of who they are is not one of those things that the Holy Spirit is going to be trying to change. So my message would be, if surgery were not an option for you and you identify as transgender, you are still loved. We love you however you are. And I support people in doing what they think they need to do to become the person they believe they are. For some people, that is changing their appearance. It can be changing their skill set. I'm going to be there for people, and I'm not going to judge what they decide to do. And I think that is very different from behavior. I get very upset when we automatically link transgender pedophilia. Somebody did it with me just this week in a conversation that was actually about a totally different topic. We were talking about patriarchy, and they took a swing into my denomination removing some language at our general conference last year. And it's like, y'all support trans people who are pedophiles. That makes you a pedophile too, because you're enabling it. I'm like, something just happened in your brain right there. And I didn't make that left turn with you. And I'm gonna let you go there by yourself.
Well, it's interesting because I think that there is a connection there, right? So I'm about to show my feminism a little bit, but of course that dude was. Do
you think that hasn't shown up before now? Because I
don't think so.
I don't think either one of us have hid that very well.
I don't know. I'm a closeted feminist. I don't think anyone would pick up on that at all. But anyway, yeah. So what we're dealing with is a very fragile male ego. I don't think all male people have fragile egos. The men in my life, none of the men in my life have fragile egos. The men in my life are very manly. So as much as they want to be manly, and then I've got other men in my life who are not very manly because that's not who they are. And, but they're all men and they all are who they are, and they all, anyway, I'm getting off topic. But the fragile male ego, this is the person who I think doesn't know who they are. I think they're the ones who have been told that if they're not, like toxically masculine to the point where they can, their knuckles are dragging on the ground, if they're not walking in that way and they're whatever, then they're not a man. And anyone else or anything else that challenges this concept of toxic masculinity, and I think toxic masculinity is a word that's being thrown around an awful lot to the point it's losing its meaning. But basically, someone who is so worried about being macho, masculine, that masculinity has become an idol, I think. Mm-hmm. It's become idolatry, that, and so therefore anyone else who walks differently through this world without clinging to that concept is a threat. And so they will go after everything, though, and everything that isn't toxically masculine or passively feminine is a threat to the worldview and to the status quo, and will cause their little house of cards to fall apart. And so they get real nervous and real anxious around anything that has to do with that, which is why I think LGBTQ, feminism, female clergy, patriarchy, all of these issues are such big issues right now because of this.
Yeah. They all challenge that traditionally accepted ideas of gender roles and identity. I had someone say to me one time that the reason that LGBTQ stuff triggered them was because they just didn't like the idea that a friend of theirs of the same gender might be attracted to them. Like that made them uncomfortable. And I was like, okay, several things. First of all, the fact that you don't like it and don't want to hear about it would not make it any less true if it were true. Second of all, for us to go around assuming that everyone is always attracted to us all the time is pretty egocentric in there. And then like the idea that like we can control who's attracted to us, like, but there's also an element for me as a woman of saying, we spend much more time having to be cautious of the messages we're sending. It's part of the double standard of our society, that if we're too friendly, we're flirting. If we're not friendly, we're being too hard, we're cold, we're a ball buster, we're a bitch. Like there's all those words that get used for us in that way. And what I think pushes on some men's ability to accept LGBTQ is having to understand a little more of our experience in dealing with sexuality in the world and the marketplace.
Interesting.
It also makes an assumption that LGBTQ people are less able to control their attraction and acting on it. And I have found that to be the opposite. The people who seem least able to handle and repress themselves from acting on an attraction where it's not wanted have been straight men. Mm-hmm. And not those in the LGBTQ community.
I think too that the idea that someone else might be attracted to them, or someone of the same gender, or sorry, I'm trying to figure out how transgender, how a transgender person might feel about them or whatever. It forces them to, for half a second, picture themselves with that person, right? Like, because that's part of the process. We find out that someone is attracted to us. We have a picture in our head of what that might be like. We either go, or And, you know, and we move on, right? Like that happens. It's a split second, I think, happen, but it happens every time we find out that someone's attracted to us. Like, wow, even if we're never going to be with that person, even if we're married or whatever, it's flattering or it's, you know, either way, you do that suddenly with someone who isn't in
Who
your
identifies differently than
right.
you.
And,
Yeah.
and suddenly it challenges all of your inner biases and bigotry and fears and prejudices and everything like that. And that's where you get that feeling. And I think what that means is it says more about you than about the other person. And I think that people who freak out about that, like, obviously you're not comfortable with who you are. You haven't taken a deep dive to evaluate who you are and why you are the way you are and all of those kinds of things. I'm not saying that you're gay. I'm saying that you're not comfortable even reflecting about any of that kind of stuff. And a thought doesn't make something so, you know, like I'm sorry. I'm descending into chaos in my own mind, but it's just well, let's bring this back around to the church. So we've been talking about the transgender issue, and the one of the comments that I always hear is, "Well, God doesn't make mistakes," and usually that's said in a totally Southern redneck. God don't make mistakes, because
True.
that's how people hear that phrase, because that's associated with people who are not intelligent or something, right? But it's not an intelligent thing to say. It's just not, and so because I want you to look at a child who was born with Down syndrome and go, well, you don't deserve to exist because God doesn't make mistakes. Or let's think about a child born with a congenital heart defect who requires medical intervention and say, we don't need to do surgery on you to fix your heart because God doesn't make mistakes. Or to the child who was born missing a limb, God doesn't make mistakes. First of all, you're calling them a mistake.
Actually, they're saying they're not a mistake, but we're not saying the person isn't loved as they are.
Yeah.
All we're saying is we're acknowledging the condition, the situation in which they were born, and not denying them the ability to state it and pursue treatment and accommodation for it. Like the
Yeah.
person with the congenital heart defect, that baby born with a congenital heart defect is loved, beloved of God, exactly as they are. But we do not deny them the ability to seek surgery and treatment to have a healthy and longer life. And to me, that is, particularly when we're talking about transgender, when they genuinely feel that, we're not saying they're not loved as they are. We're not saying they're a mistake. We're saying they can pursue medical treatment to make their life full and healthy and well. And that matching who they are with their appearance can be a piece of that to do.
Yeah. Okay. So comparing, I like this analogy of comparing transgenderism to congenital heart defect. If you look at both of them and say God doesn't make mistakes, but by allowing and not having any moral issue or hangups about a child having heart surgery, but having hangups about a child having gender reassignment treatment because they don't have surgery at the age. You're saying that God didn't give them the heart defect. Right? We're not going against God and God's creation by fixing the defect, but by fixing this over here, you are going against what God did. So it's like either God's hand is in it or it isn't, first of all. And second of all, if you fix one, you have to allow them to fix the other. Like you can't get involved. In other words, it's none of your business. Once again, it's right. And we want to be able to pick and choose what we have a say in and what we don't have a say in people's lives.
Well, and we have other issues. You mentioned Down syndrome, which is a part of the genetics, and I'm going to show my lack of knowledge. I am not a medical professional or a professional scientist, but I know that it has to do with chromosomes.
You're missing
If
one
we
chromosome.
had, if we had the ability to resolve the chromosome issue and have someone who has Down syndrome then not have Down syndrome, would we deny them the ability to do so? Some will choose not to. They
Mhm.
will say, I like who I am. I like my child as they are. We're not going to change that. I would support a family who said that. But if someone said there's a treatment available, it is risky, it is expensive, but we want to pursue it because we believe our child's life would be healthier, or I believe my life would be even better than it is, I would support them pursuing that. And for me, that's where I am on transgender. If if you want to pursue it, I will support you and pray for you and be here for you because I believe it is your decision. And I do not believe that God condemns you either for the way you find yourself right now, for the way you wish yourself to be.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. God is not offended by you wanting to change something about the way you function or walk through the world physically.
Mm-hmm.
Because I ultimately don't think that in heaven that matters. I was watching B. Recker is a guy on Instagram that I follow. I love him. He's a reformed evangelical pastor, I believe, and just is very good at kind of like putting things straight. And what he does is he takes these very, very conservative videos of people saying things, and then he's like, let's rethink this. No. And he was talking about gender and coming to the conclusion that gender is a metaphor, on a spiritually speaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's a metaphor. That specifically and spiritually, gender doesn't exist. And so by calling God he is just a metaphor for God. And then it's not actually a thing that in heaven, and I'm really messing this up. I encourage you to look it up because he's way more articulate about it than I did. And I'm still unpacking all the stuff that I heard from him. But the thing is that gender, as far as a spiritual concept, just doesn't exist. It's a non-thing. Now we have gender characteristics that exist. You know, we have feminine and masculine characteristics, but we've identified them as feminine and masculine from a worldly perspective. They're just godly characteristics that some fall on some of those characteristics fall on some people differently than others, you know. And so you've got the nurturing and the compassion and the empathy and the you know, all of those, the mothering and all of that. And I've known lots of men who carry those characteristics heavily. They're very, very masculine, straight men. Some of them are gay men. It doesn't matter. They have those characteristics. And then vice versa. You've got the protector, the fixer, the problem solver, the you know, the workhorse. There's all different types of ways we interact with one another. We all bring something to the table. We as humans have identified those as male or female. They all exist in God. And so therefore, the male-female thing really is just a metaphor. The rest of it we're talking about is genitalia and the way we tend to dress. And again, it's all created by the world. That was not created by God. The way men and women wear their hair, the way men and women dress, the way men and women interact is all social constructs that we have created.
And have changed over time.
Yes.
There was recently a video where some very conservative, very fundamentalist pastors were going off. They were even complaining because their women always wear dresses and they were wearing leggings, and they were like, leggings is stepping toward pants and they shouldn't be allowed to wear leggings, and even under the skirt. And they were like, men don't wear dresses. And I thought, do you understand what they wore in Jesus' day? Because it's much closer, the tunics and the robes were much closer to a dress than they are to the pants and trousers you're wearing today. Those kinds of things, beards or no beards, long hair or short hair for men. All of those things are cultural constructs and not gender. They are specific to the way we have engendered our society and not inherent to a particular gender. And we allow for a spectrum of those, like you talked about nurturing. Yes, women tend to be nurturers. We carry the babies, we give birth to the babies, and we tend to nurture the babies. Doesn't mean the men are not nurturing. But
Right.
even among those who identify as women, we have more and less nurturing. We have people that would have 25 children, who would work in a daycare all the time, love all the children all the time. And then we have women who love their children, but don't enjoy playing with small children, like it's not their thing. There's still women. We have men who are really great with children. We have that who nurture. We recognize a spectrum for that characteristic. I would argue that there is a spectrum for many other characteristics we associate with gender as well.
Yeah.
Well, friends, that's the first part of this conversation. We hope you'll come back to the next episode where the conversation picks up and continues. Laura and I want to thank you again for listening to Untangling Faith. Your comments, thoughts, questions, and ideas are greatly valued and even necessary to keep our episodes relevant. Please email your thoughts to untanglingfaithpodcast@gmail.com, which you can find in the About This Episode section of the podcast. We'd also appreciate it if you would share Untangling Faith on social media. Help us keep the conversation going. Thanks again, and we love you.